sa buong mundo na ang Pilipino may kakayanan na magpahusay ng kabuhayan Pilipino.
That we call on all patriotic Filipinos to discard ideological differences, party affiliations, disparity of religious beliefs and regional origins, to close our ranks, stand behind one flag, commit our honor, dedicate our lives to fight as best we can in defense of our country.
Ang ating katipunan. Ang ating katipunan. Ang palatuntunang maghahatid sa inyo ng mahahalagang impormasyon tungkol sa mga kaganapan sa loob at labas ng bansa.
Ang ating katipunan.
Magbibigay liwanag sa mga katanungang nagdudulot ng pagkalito sa mga mamamayan hango sa aral ng pandaigdigang kasaysayan.
Ang ating katipunan.
Makikinig sa inyong mga daing at kuro-kuro sa pagsusuri ng mga kasalukuyang suliranin ng ating bayan at ng buong mundo.
Ang ating katipunan.
Maglalatag ng kalutasan ng mga sanhi ng paghihirap ng kalagayan at kabuhayan ng sambayanan.
Ang ating katipunan.
Ihahatid sa inyo ni Itos Valdes ng Philippine LaRouche Society at Partido Politikal ng Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino kasama si Cathy Cruz.
Ang oras sa hudyat, 2 minuto makalipas ang ikapito ng gabi, Philippine Standard Time. Ito po ang inyong katipon, Cathy Cruz, na inyo pong makakasama sa loob po ng 2 oras. Kayo po ay nakikinig dito pa rin sa himpilan po ng RMN DZXL 558 kHz sa inyong mga AM band. At ang himpilang ito ay kasapi ng KBP, kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas. Ngayon po ay araw ng linggo, ika-9 ng Hunyo 2024, June 9, 2024. At sa lahat po ng ating mga nagdiriwang po ng kaarawan ngayong buwan po ng Hunyo, maligayang kaarawan po sa inyo. At syempre, ang atin pong mga nanonood po ngayon, saan man po kayong panig nandoon, maaari po kayong bumisita sa atin pong mga social media accounts ng Katipunan Channel at patuloy po kayong makinig dito po sa himpilan ng RMN DZXL 558 kHz sa inyong AM band. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat at magandang gabi din syempre sa ating Pangulo ng Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino, walang iba kundi si Itos Valdes. Magandang gabi sa iyo, Itos.
Magandang gabi, Cathy, and magandang gabi sa lahat ng tagapanood and tagapakinig sa aming radio and our online channels, no? Rumble, YouTube, X or Twitter, at sa Facebook, syempre. Magandang gabi sa inyo lahat. Hope you join us and ask your questions and hopefully we can answer them. Back to you, Cathy.
Okay, thank you, Itos. At syempre sa lahat po ng mga masugid na taga-subaybay, please like, share, and subscribe ang atin pong mga YouTube accounts. Anyway, ang pag-uusapan po natin, experts warning get louder on World War III danger. Sabi nga, babala ng mga eksperto tumitindi ngayon sa posibleng mapaminsalang World War III. Nako, tandaan nyo po, nito lamang pong nakaraang linggo, lalo na po nung Lunes, dumating sa bansa si Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky. At ayon po sa mga ulat, humiling po si Pangulong Zelensky ng tulong para suportahan ang kanyang bansa sa pakikipagdigmaan sa bansang Russia. Dahil dito, humingi ng panayam ang isang kilalang announcer po ng DZME tungkol sa presensya ni Zelensky sa Pilipinas kay Itos Valdes, ang Pangulo ng Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino. At Itos, mukhang ang paningin at panawagan ng KDP sa mga opisyal ng pamahalaan, lalo na kay Pangulong Bongbong Marcos, ay nagbigay alalahanin sa maraming Pilipino at sa kabilang banda ay umaayon sa'yo ang marami nating mga kababayan dahil obviously hirap na talaga ang nararanasan ng ating mga kababayan bunsod ng mataas na bilihin, kuryente at tubig. Pero alam mo, sa totoo lang nabitin ako sa iyong panayam at mukhang may nais ka pang mailabas o ipahayag tungkol dito kay Zelensky, ang bansang Ukraine at ang paggamit ng US sa kanila laban sa Russia. At naalala ko, nabanggit mo rin na hindi imbitado si Russian President Vladimir Putin sa isang Peace International Summit kaugnay dito sa digmaang Russo-Ukrainian na gaganapin dito sa Switzerland sa June 15 to 16 ng taong kasalukuyan. Subalit bago ang A15 ay may gagawin din ang Schiller Institute sa panguna ni Scott Ritter at Helga Zepp LaRouche, leader ng Schiller Institute at iba pang mga eksperto na magsasalita sa isang emergency press conference sa June 12. At ito ay gaganapin sa National Press Club sa Washington DC na may temang The Danger of Nuclear War is Real and Must Be Stopped. Marami akong ipinunto, Itos, pero simulan mo doon sa epekto ng pagdating ni Zelensky dito sa ating bansa at tungkol sa Peace International Summit na gagawin sa Switzerland. Itos?
Yes, na-interview po tayo last Monday, I think early morning, no? Pero syempre, dahil may oras din yung radyo, medyo bitin yung interview. Salamat pa rin ako sa mga nagpa-interview sa akin na nagbigyan tayo ng pagkakataon na to give our opinion on the matter, no? But what I wanted to say more, if we had the time, no, and had the opportunity, is that one thing that people have to know, lahat ng number one, ang mainstream media po, lahat ng balitang na nakikita po natin sa mainstream media at sa dyaryo, sa TV at minsan sa radyo rin, kasi lahat sila, kinukuha nila yung international news from very few sources. And those sources, honestly, are not truthful. This is what I wanted to say. They are not telling you the whole truth. Number one. So you have to dig deeper. Kailangan na maghanap tayo ng totoong balita. You have to go to Twitter, you have to go sa YouTube, madami pong lumalabas at we have different tonight marami tayong eksperto and shows on YouTube na papakita namin sa inyo na they interview yung totoong mga eksperto sa nuclear war and military strategy from both sides, Russia and the United States. And makikita nyo po lahat ng sinasabi nila, sinasabi na rin po namin. At we wanted to show it and we wanted to give an opportunity dito sa ating live stream on Twitter, Rumble, and even on YouTube and Facebook na makita o marinig ng taong bayan ang totoo na nangyari sa Ukraine. The truth of the matter is, based on all of the intelligence reports of these military experts who are still connected to the intelligence network dun sa US and in Russia and in other countries, lahat sila iisa lang sinasabi, wala na yung Ukraine. There's no chance for Ukraine to do anything. And in fact, araw-araw, libo-libo ang mga namamatay sa army ng Ukraine. In fact, sinasabi nga nila at maririnig natin mamaya ang mga panayam ng mga eksperto, yung military experts and security experts. And sabi nila, desperado na yung gobyerno ni Zelensky na nag-aano na sila, parang pinipilit na nila ng yung mga tao, yung mga lalaki diyan sa Ukraine, kinikidnap nila sa pamilya nila, sasalpak nila sa isang uniform, bibigyan nila ng baril, at papadala sila sa front line. Doon sila mamamatay. Yun po ang nangyayari ngayon sa Ukraine. At this is a very desperate time. And like I mentioned during the interview, si Zelensky nagsuspend po ng eleksyon sa bansa niya. So diktador siya. Ang diktador na yan, pinapasok natin sa Malacanang at winelcome parang state visit na hindi naman. Umiikot lang yan si Zelensky. Alam rin niya na hindi na sila makakabawi. The territories now are being taken over by Russia. Slowly. Kasi si Putin, hindi naman, ayaw niyang pumatay ng mga sibilyan. Ang ginagawa daw ng yung mga Ukrainian at yung army, ay nagtatago sila sa mga ospital, mga shopping mall, mga ganon. So maraming sibilyan. Hindi naman makapasok ang mga sundalo ng Russia doon kasi baka may mamatay. Yan po ang ginagawa. Yun lang po nagagawa nila. While this is happening, umiikot si Zelensky, nagpe-PR sa mundo. At hindi ako yung eksperto dito po. Ako lang ay mahilig mag-research at mahilig maghanap ng katotohanan. At yung mga nakalap ko, comparing all the news and the results and the events that are happening, makikita po kung sino yung nagsasabi ng totoo at hindi. That's what I wanted to say in the interview. Kasi puro tayo dito sa media naniniwala at kinukuha natin yung mga foreign news natin dyan sa mga regular sources. Yung mga mainstream media na tinatawag. At yung mga news sources natin and news service is from, let's say, Reuters. Or there's another news service before that we used to use. Hindi na natin pina-fact check yan. Hindi na natin dino-double check. Yun na ang lumalabas. Paano kung mali? Di ba? Tapos yan ang pinapalabas sa mga dyaryo natin, yan ang pinapalabas. Minsan nagiging propaganda na. Opposite na opposite. Baliktad po ang nangyayari ngayon sa Ukraine na binabalita dito. Okay? The other thing that I wanted to say is very dangerous. That US President Biden, may lumabas na nga na report last week, na pumapayag na siya na gamitin yung mga binibigay nilang armas sa Ukraine para umatake sa loob ng Russia. Ibig sabihin, pwede niyo na gamitin ito. Ito yung baril ko. Barilin mo na yung tao dyan sa loob ng Russia. Huwag dito sa may gera lang. Doon sa loob ng Russia pumaril ka. Anong palagay nyo ang mensahe niyan para kay Putin? Inuudyok nila at pinoprovoke nila si Putin na gumalaw. At gagalaw na daw siya. This is what we're facing today. Kaya ang dami na nagsasalita, yung Schiller Institute, the LaRouche Group, so many military and intelligence experts are already warning. Nandito na po tayo. Tatanga-tanga yung mga taong sa mundo, kala nila walang mangyayaring gera. Isang insidenteng maliit, lilipad na yung mga nuclear missiles. Hindi to biro. Kaya yung mga ginagawang propaganda dyan sa South China Sea na kunyari, pinoprovoke po ang gera. at tayo pinapaharap. Di ba? So this is very dangerous because Russia and China are not stupid. Pinapalabas lang nila sa mga article at yung mga mainstream media at yung mga movies, popular culture, na tanga-tanga yung China at Russia na masama silang tao. Hindi po totoo yun. Magbasa-basa po tayo, mag-research tayo sa history. Russia right now, according to US military experts, yung mga hindi correct at nakakapagsalita, yung mga former general, sinasabi na nila, delikado yung Russia yan, magaling sa gera yan. Magaling yan, hindi tayo mananalo dyan. Pero itong presidente nila, tinutulak at tinutulak. Or yung nagko-control ng presidente ng US, sa likod ng presidente ng US, yung mga forces, are pushing him into war. Pag may nakikita kayong video sa YouTube o sa Twitter na si Biden, ang dami-dami po, mag-research lang po tayo at i-repost natin. Kasi yun yung katotohanan. Yun po ang tinatago sa atin ng mga mainstream media. At yung mga mainstream media dito, hindi nila pinapalabas. In other words, ginagawang tanga yung mga Pilipino. Pinapalabas lang na yung PR. At sumusunod sila sa gusto ng US State Department. That's what's happening. Ito lang kailangan yung pwede nyong ilabas. This is corporate media, but the Filipinos should know the truth. And they should bring out the truth. They should research. It's all there. Hindi naman kailangan sikreto to. Nandun na. Hindi lang pinapalabas. At lalo na bobobo yung mga taong bayan natin. Kasi hindi nila iniisip na pwede tayong girahin eh. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say lang, Kath, during the interview with Zelensky. So Zelensky is a very dangerous man, pero sumusunod lang siya sa utos. Mag-research po kayo lahat ng mga nakikinig sa akin. Mag-research kayo lahat, saan galing ba yan si Zelensky? Ano ba yung history niyan? Nasa YouTube yan or nasa Twitter yan, hanapin nyo lang yan. Bago siya naging leader po, no? Ano ba nangyari sa Ukraine noong 2014? Ano ba nangyari sa Minsk Agreements? Makikita nyo po, hindi lahat ng binabasa at nakikita natin sa mainstream media ay yung totoo. Makikita nyo po yun. At dito lang tayo. Tapusin ko lang to because we have several videos that I want them to listen to and to hear. But it's very, very important that they listen to this military. Hindi po ako military expert. Gusto ko lang malaman yung katotohanan. Kaya ang dami-dami kong pinapanood, ang dami kong pinabasa, at kinokompara ko. At ang conclusion po natin ay yung mainstream media, wala po kayong matututunan dyan. Kung yan lang ang source ng quote-unquote balita nyo po. Okay? Kat?
Anyway, it's already 7:16 na po ng gabi, Philippine Standard Time, at kayo po ay nakikinig pa rin sa impilan ng RMN DZXL 558 kHz sa inyong AM band. At sabayan nyo po kaming napapanood sa pamagitan po ng social media accounts ng Katipunan Channel. Nako, itos, kinakailangan talaga magpatuloy tayo na ipahayag, no, etong talagang mga tunay na nangyayari. Pero ang
Right.
isa rin na
Sorry, Kat, interrupt kita.
Okay.
Nakalimutan ko yung sinasabi mong Peace Summit. Hindi
Yes.
totoong Peace Summit yon. Bola yon. Maganda lang yung pangalan nun. Yung sa Switzerland na ginagawa. Ang ginagawa niyan, parang umiikot si Zelensky sa mundo, nag-iimbita siya ng mga bansa. Pero ang sasabihin niya, mag-isa tayo against Russia. Yan ang sasabihin niya sa peace summit. Hindi imbitado yung China. Hindi imbitado yung Russia. Okay? Pero inimbita yung China at sinabi nga ng China, kung hindi naman seryoso yung peace summit na yan, ba't kami pupunta? Okay? So that is a farce. At siguro bibigyan ng press dito kasi inimbita yung presidente natin at nag-commit na siya pumunta dyan sa Switzerland. Diba ho? Pero ano yon, parang ano lang yon, pang press release, pang propaganda po against Russia and later on against China. Yun ang nangyayari dyan. Ang ino-organize ng Schiller Institute, which is different, is to counter that propaganda. To make sure that everybody knows what's going on and everybody should ask for peace. Because we are on the brink of World War III. And before anything else, I want to you can prepare the video of Harley Schlanger, yung video 3. I want first the Harley Schlanger video para makinig ang ano ba nangyayari sa mundo ngayon, ano yung strategic overview. Tapos after that, they offer what they call peace through development. In other words, huwag tayong mag-away-away. Join na lang tayo para maggawa tayo ng mga infrastructure projects and reform the world monetary system. All, Russia, China, the US, everybody, which is the design of LaRouche na sinasabi niya dati na 4 powers. So let's listen first to Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization para mag-overview siya ng mga nangyayari sa mundo and how to get out of it. Kasi papunta na tayo sa gera. Yun lang.
Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for June 7th, 2024. While much of the world is in an uproar over the continued slaughter conducted by the Israeli Defense Forces against the people of Palestine, and while there's discussion about will there be nukes used or not, as the West is escalating the provocations against Russia and Ukraine, there's an extremely important conference underway in the Russian city of St. Petersburg, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. It's attended by thousands of people from over 130 countries. And the major topic is the dialogue to both end war, but expand the range of mutual economic cooperation. President Putin was there to deliver an address to welcome people. He did a 3-hour press conference. And one of the things he was asked is, does he expect there'll be improvements in the Russian and U.S. relationship? And he said he didn't rule out improvements in U.S.-Russian relations if the U.S. starts to focus on its own interests, unquote. He said he believes that public opinion is moving that way, prioritizing national interests. And if that really takes on some momentum, then things might change. He said public sentiment can play a decisive role in outflanking the globalist warhawks. Now, this was a message that was reflected by Helga Zepp-LaRouche in her own webcast dialogue with me on Wednesday of this week, where she said that people must become the peacemakers. And she was also interviewed in TASS, and the interview there appeared as this conference was taking place. And what she said is that she agrees with Putin about the needed change in U.S. policy toward adopting a new security and development architecture, which she has been championing for the last years. But in this, she highlighted the role the BRICS alliance is playing and said the United States must be brought into that alliance. In her summation, according to TASS, she said, quote, "The peoples of the world need a beautiful idea," unquote, that would allow them, quote, "to dream about a better future," unquote. Now, much of the talk about the better future of cooperation rather than threats, bullying, and sanctions is centered around the BRICS. Dilma Rousseff, the president of the BRICS New Development Bank, is there in St. Petersburg, as are many bankers and businessmen looking forward to the potential for the expansion of cooperation with Eurasia. And this was discussed by Putin and others as the next BRICS summit will be in Kazan in October of this year. Now, there are many questions about what we can expect from the BRICS, and I'm going to take up 3 questions that have been asked frequently and that I received from some of our listeners and viewers over the last couple of days. These questions are, what exactly is the BRICS? What was LaRouche's role in shaping this idea of the BRICS? And will the BRICS create a new international currency? So on the first question, the BRICS were initially 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. At their meeting last August, they initiated membership for 6 other countries, one of which was Argentina, which has now rejected it under the radical free market Malay government. The other new members were Egypt, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, and Saudi Arabia. These are not all consolidated yet, but it's interesting. Take a look at the map and look where Gaza is, and look at these countries I just mentioned: Egypt, Iran, UAE, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia. That's the target area. Do you think that the escalation of the fighting there has anything to do with an attempt to disrupt the BRICS? Now, there are 30 or more other nations requesting to join, including Indonesia, Algeria, Nigeria, and the BRICS as a whole have an enormous potential future, especially as you have countries such as the oil-producing countries, some of which have development funds and national currency funds, which could be used for the projects of the new development bank of the BRICS. Now, to get to the second question, where did the BRICS come from? A lot of credit is given to a Goldman Sachs analyst named Jim O'Neill, who provided a report. He presided over a group that wrote a report in 2001, and the proposal was based on the idea that Brazil, Russia, India, and China are growing economies, and they should be incorporated in some way in the G7. And people say, well, therefore, that's the origin of the BRICS. Well, the intent is what you have to look at. Yes, those are the right countries, the same countries that LaRouche initially talked about. But his idea was to co-opt them, to bring them in as partners in the G7, which at this point would mean that they would be forced to surrender some of their sovereignty and go along with the green agenda, which was what has been pushed by the G7. Now, instead, the thing you have to ask yourself is, well, what is the intent of the BRICS? For LaRouche, it's very clear, and I'm going to be including some links in the description box of several articles on LaRouche's various speeches and writings that took up this question of what became the BRICS. But his idea was that you had to address taking power away from the Anglo-Dutch liberal system of free trade and deindustrialization as the goal of the green policy. And what LaRouche said is that there are only a few countries in the world powerful enough to do that, and which would have the intent to do that. You know, Germany or Japan could play a role, but they're completely subordinate to the United States and the United Kingdom. So you take Russia, China, India initially, and then add Brazil, and then later South Africa. And now you have a core of nations with both the power and also the commitment to sovereignty and the commitment to development of other countries that could then serve to provide an alternative to the blackmail and threats and sanctions of the existing dollar-based system. Just to give you a couple of key moments in this, In December 1989, the LaRouche organization, especially under Helga and Lynn's direction, put forward a proposal for what was called the productive triangle, how to deal with the collapse of the Soviet system, and how to take the area between Paris, Vienna, and Berlin and turn that into spiral arms going into Eastern Europe to allow for the economic development of those areas, freed from the communist system. Now, this was an attractive idea. It was a proposal which was somewhat reflected in one by Alfred Herrhausen of Deutsche Bank, who unfortunately was assassinated just as the wall was coming down. But LaRouche was putting this forward as an idea that the potential in the East could be realized through an alliance with the West. That's what geopoliticians of the British stripe have always been opposed to. The idea of a European alliance with Eurasia was the greatest threat to their empire, and they saw that as something that had to be stopped. Now, another major point in the development of this alternative system was in 1996, when Helga Zepp-LaRouche put forward a proposal building the Silk Road land bridge, the basis for the mutual security interests of Asia and Europe. And this was part of an initiative to expand beyond the productive triangle. Keep in mind, 96 was what? The period of the shock therapy attack on Russia, the destruction of the Russian economy. And there were Russians who were looking for an alternative. And it was at this moment that the LaRouches represented the one serious alternative. In January 1997, then, Helga put out another article, The Eurasian Land Bridge, the New Silk Road. And this began to grow. It incorporated the idea that later was that of the Belt and Road Initiative, but continues to be this idea of an East-West collaboration. Now, at the same time, you had in Russia a reaction against the shock therapy of Yeltsin, which, as I think Jeffrey Sachs, one of the people who was involved in it at the time, said was more shock, less therapy. That is, there was no credit for development for these countries. Well, Yevgeny Primakov, the prime minister of Russia from 1998 to 99, put forward an idea of an alliance between Russia, India, and China. And this was picked up by Lyndon LaRouche in 2001 on a series of visits he made to Moscow, where he met with economists, scientists, and historians, and put forward the idea that became the BRICS alliance. Another moment in this was a webcast that LaRouche did in 2008, which was after the October 2008 blowout. The webcast was titled The Four-Power Agreement in its World Context. And what he called for is Russia, India, China, and the US to work together toward this new system. And this is what we're fighting for today. The BRICS is going. It's not stoppable. The question is, will the United States try to stop it? Or will the United States recognize that the true interest of the United States would be to join with the BRICS? Which brings us to the final question. Is there a new BRICS currency in the process of being developed? Well, the reality is that it's out of necessity that certain things are underway. A new system for trade and settling imbalances outside of the dollar system. That's already in process. The use of national currencies rather than the dollar, that's already in process. And that the idea of a new currency is that it would have to be backed by something physical. Not just gold and silver, but it could be wheat, it could be fertilizer, it could be strategic metals, all of which exist in abundance in Eurasia. So what we're looking toward is whether there will be cooperation or opposition from the dollar-based world. in the best of all possible worlds, the dollar would be part of the mix. And the U.S. would be part of this because the U.S. still has capabilities in science and technology and productive capacity that would be very important for establishing the development perspective needed for the Southern Hemisphere. But the Global South is not going to wait for the United States to become more beneficent. And so the BRICS are looking at various options, various opportunities, and they're moving very aggressively. And I'd urge you to read the articles I'll link in the description section to get more on this. So this is where we stand now. A new security and development architecture or war and chaos. And it's up to you to decide.
Okay, napanood po ninyo ang mismong si Harley Schlanger. Siya po ang spokesperson ng LaRouche organization at napanood po ninyo na etong tungkol sa yung BRICS, no? Road to the future, 'di ba, Itos? At makikita mo, no, sa kabilang mundo o sa kabilang ginagawa habang tong isa ay gera ang hinaharap. Ito namang isa walang ginagawa kundi ang makipag-ugnayan sa iba't ibang mga bansa, iba't ibang mga leader para magtatag ng tinatawag nating Belt and Road Initiative. Land, sea, 'di ba? Para magkaroon talaga ng pagkakaisa dahil sinasabi nga ni Harley Schlanger, eto lang yung daan para magkaroon ng kapayapaan sa buong mundo, 'di ba, Itos?
Right. And just like yung parang brand na yan ng LaRouche, no? Si Lyndon LaRouche, nakikita niya on one hand itong mga war hawks na tinatawag na gusto
Yes.
magkagera
Yes.
on all sides, on all countries. During the time, the 80s, 70s, Cold War yan. At tapos nagdadagdag at nagmamanufacture sila ng armas. So may tinatawag na arms race. So si Lyndon LaRouche nagpro-propose ng a scientific solution to combat the threat of war, which is he worked with President Reagan in the SDI. Now the SDI is a technology that would at that time use laser beam na pag nag-launch yung isang country ng nuclear missile, yung laser beam na yon tatamaan siya at magiging inutil yung missile. Hindi na mag-arm yung mismong trigger sa loob ng missile na yan. At gustong-gusto ng US yan. Ang problema, sabi ni LaRouche, kailangan bigay rin natin sa Russia. Bakit? Kasi pag isang bansa lang ang may ganun teknolohiya, mas delikado ang mundo.
Correct.
Kailangan bigay niya sa lahat para wala ng threat ng war. Yun. So that is the solution. And we're hearing this from military experts now. Kasi sinasabi nga nila, yung drone strike ng ginawa ng Ukraine pagkatapos nag-announce si President Biden na pwede nilang gamitin. They hit Russia in an area, mountainous region. They hit a couple of early warning radar systems ng Russia. Yung tinatawag natin early warning, we talked about it last week. Yung early warning na yan, ibig sabihin, nakaka-detect pag may nag-launch na, nagpalipad na ng isang missile. Okay? Pag nag-early warning na yan, nakita na ng Russia, makaka-react pa sila. Ibig sabihin, ilang minuto yan, siguro 10 to 15 minutes bago dapat matamaan yung Moscow. Kasi kung nilaunch yung missile na yan galing sa NATO countries, for example, papuntang Moscow, yung early warning radar na yan, pag na-detect at na-determine ng radar na threat nga ito at na nanganganib ang Moscow at magka-calculate yan, magko-compute yan kung saan galing yung missile na yan at saan papunta, minuto na yan. Tapos sasabihin nila, tatawag sila dun sa country yun, nag-launch ba kayo ng missile? Pag sinabi ng di sumagot, may protocol na sila. Tinatawag nilang nuclear protocol. Ang US at yung Russia may ganito, nuclear protocol. Kasi kailangan, step by step, lahat ng mga security systems, i-checklist mo yan bago tuluyan na mag-nuclear war. Kasi alam ng lahat, pag nagtuluyan ng nuclear war, pag nagpalipad na lahat, walang mananalo dyan. Walang mabubuhay dyan. Tanga-tanga na lang ang mga ibang eksperto dyan na sinasabi na ang US ay lamang. Aanhin mo yung sunog na pagkain, hindi mo rin makain kahit ikaw na lang nabuhay.
Correct.
Diba? So this is what they're warning about. At pag tinamaan yung early warning system ng Russia, wala na silang oras para magdesisyon. Pag na-detect na yung isang missile, rather than 15 minutes, they have 3 minutes to detect and to decide anong gagawin nila. Okay? Yan mas delikado at yan ang gusto mangyari sa mga nagko-control kay Zelensky at kay President Biden ng US. Okay, yan ang delikado dyan. Now, ano yung sinasabi ni Harley Schlanger? Ang sinasabi niya na we have a chance to organize these nations on a new idea, more positive, hindi yung negative na puro gera at puro sakit at puro yun yung kabila, yun yung tinatawag na yung mga World Economic Forum na
WEF.
nagsasabi patay na lahat kasi climate change, wala na tayong magawa. Dahil dami na masyadong tao. Si Bill Gates, sabi niya, kailangan 15% reduction ng tao. 15% of 8 billion. I-compute nyo nga yan. Yan ang sinasabi ni Bill Gates. Initial lang po yun. Sabi niya, and Bill Gates is the #1 promoter and supporter of vaccines sa mundo. Siya yung nagtutulak ng mRNA vaccines. Okay? Siya yung #1 private contributor through his foundation to the WHO. Kaya tulak ng vaccine itong mga WHO at yung mga matatalinong DOH natin, sumusunod lang. Di ba? Lumalabas na lahat. There is a landmark decision by a court. Ninth Circuit Court yata yun sa hindi ko alam anong state ng US. Pero sabi niya, ang mRNA daw ay hindi vaccine. Hindi maituturing na vaccine. Malaking desisyon po yan. Kasi pwedeng ihabla ang mga pharmaceutical companies dahil hindi nila pwedeng tawag na vaccine. Malaking issue po yan at nanggugulo lahat ngayon sa mundo. Sa Japan, magulo dahil doon. So there is so much transformation happening sa mundo ngayon. There is a pushback from the people against these big corporations that seem to want depopulation. Okay, so back to Harley. Ito yung side nila. Gusto nila gera, gusto nila depopulation, gusto nila sakit. Sabi ng Harley, ito dapat positive. Dito tayo, humanity can work together to promote development and cooperation in all nations. And the BRICS is an example of that. Kasama yung China, Russia, and India dyan. China, Russia, and India, the most populous nations on Earth. Tapos lahat sila nag-de-dollarization na. Ibig sabihin, they're taking out, they're decoupling from the dollar. Ibig sabihin, ayaw na nila mangailangan sa dollar. Ibig sabihin nun, yung dollar ng US, sana nila makuha yung lakas nila. Yung mismong currency.
Wala na.
Wala na. Kasi itong mga Saudi Arabia, India, Russia, China, you know, Russia is the #1 oil producer sa mundo ngayon, ha? #1. Energy. He still supplies energy to Europe. Kahit ginagago na siya ng NATO, nagbibigay pa rin siya. This is what's happening sa mundo. So, and this BRICS and the LaRouche organization has always been on the side of humanity. Ibig sabihin, let's not make war. Let's develop humanity. Let's strengthen the general welfare of all peoples of all nations. Ganon yung legacy ni Lyndon LaRouche. At ito pinapatuloy nila Harley Schlanger at yung asawa niya si Helga by organizing this peace conference. This is a real peace conference because it's peace and development. The other one, which we will show in the next video, is the Russia organized the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum na marami pong nations pumunta. It is an international forum where peace and economic development were discussed.
Yes.
Okay? And I want to show you this next video kasi hindi yan pinapalabas dito. Wala kayong maririnig sa mainstream media. Dyaryo, lahat, wala. Pero ito yung nagaganap. And it shows the intention of Russia. Hindi siya nag-organize against Zelensky. Diba? Hindi siya gera yung hanap niya. Naghahanap siya ng cooperation and peace. Sino bang may ayaw na yun? Diba? So we want to show an excerpt of an interview. Again, this is from YouTube. This video, hanapin ko lang yung, okay, it is from Daniel Davis, Bronze Star Medal of Valor in Iraq, Star Service in Afghanistan. And then meron siyang channel and then he interviewed Larry Johnson, who is a former CIA analyst na pumunta sa St. Petersburg dyan sa Russia and attending the video. So the video 1 this is where sinasabi nga nila, nagsasabi na si Putin, pag nagpakawala kayo ng missile dyan towards Russia, hindi na ako maghihintay, hindi na ako mag-iisip. Mapalipad na rin ako. At walang may gustong mangyari yun. So, Ver, can you please play the first video?
Vladimir Putin earlier today warned in the most direct way possible that he may actually use nuclear weapons against the United States or any nation at all that continues to threaten his sovereignty or his territorial integrity, however he defines that. How ironic that on this day, January 6, 2024, the Soviet Union, we were actually fighting on the same side on that day and continued all the way through until things turned south after the war was over and the reconstruction began and all that. And then you had, well, I think everybody knows, then we turned into the Cold War. In 1949, we became basically antagonistic. But today, the world is again in a very, very perilous situation. There's a big war raging in Europe. And now then, because of the potential for escalation, it could become even a global affair. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But and just to let people know, because from the title we had here, Larry Johnson is going to be joining us live from Russia, where he's at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg. And he's going to have some definite great enlightenment for us from what people on the ground are thinking there, what some of the Russians are thinking, what some of the foreigners are thinking, and just what the thinking is from Russia about, how seriously we should take some of these things. We have some difficulties right now. He has some transportation challenges that he's trying to get through so we can get to where his camera is, where he can, or at least get to a place where he can talk to us. So apologize for that. It was something that just hit him at the very last second, so we weren't able to get onto that. But we're going to continue the conversation here, and as soon as he's able to join us, he's going to pop in and we'll bring him right up. But on this same day, so on the same beach where we just showed you some of those pictures from 80 years ago, President Biden was also interviewed on the same beach today, where he was asked about some of the issues that I've told you about, what Putin has said about the possibility of escalating into a nuclear conflict. And here's what he had to say.
Let me ask you about what Vladimir Putin said last night about this authorization of American weapons inside Russia. He said the supply of high-precision weapons to Ukraine for strikes on Russian territory is direct participation in this war. He went on to say that this is the way to serious problems, and again talked about Russia's nuclear capabilities. Does that concern you?
I've known him for over 40 years. He's concerned me for 40 years. He's not a decent man. He's a dictator, and he's struggling to make sure he holds this country together while still keeping this assault going. We're not talking about giving them weapons to strike Moscow, to strike the Kremlin, to strike in, just across the border where they're receiving significant fire from conventional weapons used by the Russians to go into Ukraine to kill Ukrainians.
Okay, so what he was talking about there, if you're not familiar with what Biden is referring to when he says, well, we're not going to say we're going to attack Moscow or something. Look, here's an important distinction. We don't get to decide what qualifies and what doesn't for how another nation views strikes into their territory. Now, this is what Secretary Blinken a few days earlier revealed about just how the decision-making process in the United States went and exactly what is authorized.
The stakes couldn't be higher in this moment. We know that if Russia's aggression is allowed to proceed in Ukraine with impunity, it will not stop with Ukraine. Over the past few weeks, Ukraine came to us and asked for the authorization to use weapons that we're providing to defend against this aggression, including against Russian forces that are massing on the Russian side of the border and then attacking into Ukraine. That went right to the president, and as you've heard, he's approved the use of our weapons for that purpose. Going forward, we'll continue to do what we've been doing, which is, as necessary, adapt and adjust.
Yeah, we'll just adapt and adjust and do what we think we should do. But look, Putin, and we're going to show you some of these comments here in a minute, is not taking very kindly to this. And I think that it's not even wise policy to think that we can literally do anything we want to Russia and that there will never be a response. I mean, you know, there's so many things earlier on in this war that we were afraid to do. We were, quote, self-deterred, as in the phrase of some, that we didn't want to take too much of a risk that might spawn a Russian retaliation beyond the borders of Ukraine that could potentially draw us into a conflict. And, you know, we were afraid to, whether it was main battle tanks or armored personnel carriers, self-propelled howitzers, towed howitzers, air defense systems, and then later on with jets, F-16s, you know, all those things were concerned. Then they eventually all got released. I think I showed you yesterday, there was a comment from Volodymyr Zelensky, who, in his view, it's just a matter of time until everything gets released. So you heard Biden there on the Omaha Beach on Normandy earlier today say, well, we're not talking about striking into the Kremlin or into Moscow or, you know, someplace really deep there. We're just talking about on the southern border of Russia, north of Kharkiv Oblast, where we're just wanting to hit some of the things there. But you see that his history has been that first we say we'll go this far, and then we'll go a little bit farther, and then we'll keep going further beyond that. So you see Zelensky got that message, and that's why he's saying, yes, just a matter of time, and then we'll be able to do this. And I assure you that Vladimir Putin also is tracking on that same history, and that he's not taking anybody's word for anything, that it's going to somehow be only in the Kharkiv area or in north of the Kharkiv area, or that will even be fine with him. And in fact, we see that it's not, because already Russia has decided that they're going to start expanding their naval operations into our hemisphere. Here, if you could throw that line up there. So this is from earlier today, or actually it was announced yesterday, that Russia is expected to begin naval and air exercises in the Caribbean. U.S. officials say they have discovered that. So now then there's already some action here where Russia is saying, hey, we're going to move our military assets into your backyard. because all this stuff has been happening on their front porch, not even their backyard. But now then you see that Russia is saying, all right, this stuff has been going on for a long time. You've continued to hit stuff. Now then it's Western military kit coming into Russian territory, not just the Western military kit and ammunition and weapons and stuff like that has been fighting against the Russians in Ukraine. Now it's the Western military equipment, and by some estimates being fired by Western military personnel, at least being operated and assisted by, and firing it into Russia proper. That's different. Now, there's been proxy wars going on for a long time where, the Russians in the past were actively fighting against the U.S. in the Vietnam War sometimes, and certainly in the Korean War in the air. So there's some history for that, and we've certainly done the same in return. But Russia has never struck in America or American assets in their proxy wars. We had neither until now. Now, all of a sudden, we want to escalate a little bit further. And the thing that's so frustrating to me is that there's no value to this. There's no upside to the West. That somehow that's going to be something that's going to trip the advantage back over to the Ukraine side, and somehow they're going to be able to win, because it almost doesn't even have any impact on the actual fundamentals of the war, and that is who has the most artillery shells, who has the most rockets and precision missiles, who has the most glide bombs, who has the best electronic warfare, who has the most artillery shell production capacity, the most artillery shells, the most artillery pieces, and of course, the most important, who has the most personnel and the most trained personnel to have. Those are the things that determine whether the war is won or lost on the ground. What do these handful of pinprick strikes into the Russian territory have anything to do with all of those fundamentals? It has nothing to do with it. You may have heard me mention on some of these things before, but listen, like whether it's these glide bombs that you're seeing on the screen right there, what we've talked about before, or any of the other capacities the Russians have, they have the ability to produce a lot more of them and do them a lot better on the Ukraine side. Having a handful of pinprick strikes deep into Russian territory or anywhere with American stuff is not going to change any of these dynamics. And listen, in case you're unclear about this, I saw Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General for NATO, many times recently, and again yesterday, keeps wanting to say what sounds plausible. Hey, Ukraine has a right to defend themselves, and if Russia's attacking them, they have every right to attack into Russia. No one's questioned that. That's not been an issue. It's never been an issue. Do you realize that Ukraine actually fostered an incursion into Russia earlier this year, into the Belgorod area, with his alleged some kind of freedom fighter Russian troops, allegedly, that conducted this. And they actually had an incursion where they actually, for a period of time, took over some small villages on the Russian side of the border. The Ukraine side has been firing into Russia for a long time, for years, actually. And earlier this year, actually, they had some pretty decent success at some Russian fuel depots, at some fuel processing plants, ammunition depots, etc. Some of the factories that are making some of this. So they've been doing this for a long time, whether it was with groups that were on the ground that were doing sabotage things or drones, or some of their own missiles. They've been doing this for a long time. So no one has stopped them, and they have been doing it. Russia understands that part. You're at war with Ukraine. You understand that's what the enemy's going to try to do. What distinguishes this now, and why Russia and Vladimir Putin in particular are starting to say, hey, we need to do something different, because now it's Western weapons that are firing into Russia. And we've already seen some of the HIMARS have been firing into Belgorod. There's some additional reporting yesterday that it's continuing on. And now then, that is a direct change. That's something that, like I said, with the proxy wars, that's something that hadn't happened before, that the West was actually firing into Russian territory, killing Russian people, destroying Russian military targets. That is different. So now then, when we start seeing Putin say he's going to escalate by doing the same thing, and we're going to show you this shortly, where Putin said that they're going to do the same thing against American/Western assets, who knows where, he was unspecific, in the world, Does he really mean that? Or is he afraid to escalate? Is he afraid to tit for tat, which is what, Russians have historically done for many, many decades, going back to the USSR times, where those, if the West does something, they do something similar in return, something equivalent. They haven't done that so far then. But the question is, will they do it now? Now, I've already talked to many people in the West here today, and a lot of them are like saying, yeah, no, this is just more of the same from Russia. It's just a bunch of threats. They're not going to make good, because they know that there would be consequences if they do that. But the question is, and I'm actually asking you this, we're going to do something a little bit different today than we've done before. I told you sometimes I'm watching the comments that people are putting here, but I'm actually going to ask you a question here. And Gary, if you could continue to watch these, because I can't watch them as they come in. And if you see any comments here that are worthy, let's pop them up on the screen. To this question, do you really believe that Putin would do some of these things? Would he risk taking the actions like providing weapons to some American adversaries in the Middle East, for example, or maybe somewhere in Africa that would then use their Russian assets to attack and destroy American military assets? That would certainly come with a cost. I can't imagine that the U.S. would do nothing. So the question is, knowing that, do you think that Putin would actually do that? Should we trust, believe rather, what Putin says? Okay, so I see here, Mimi says, please do not provoke the nuclear bear. And, and I'm wondering, that's so many in the West don't want to do that. They actually do want to provoke the bear. I mean, how could anybody say we haven't been doing that, especially with these strikes directly on Russian territory? So we seem to be doing that. And I'm just wondering what your impression is. Anybody throw up in the comments here about, do you think that Russia actually means this? I see here that you say, yes, the Russians do not bluff. I sometimes I think that if it's not an overt bluff, I think there's been some times where Russia has said some things, and we're going to show you some actually going back into February that Putin has said there. And of course, he hasn't made good on those things yet, especially as related to nuclear weapons. But the legitimate warning is there. So maybe it hasn't been a bluff up to this point, but it's been a warning that they can do this. Yeah, and I see Preston Young there. Poking the bear is going to backfire eventually. And I fear that you're right there as well, because we have been operating under this assumption so far that Russia won't. And because they didn't retaliate beyond the borders of Ukraine with many of these other things, as we continue to escalate the type of weapons, the amount of weapons or ammunition that were coming in, the type of ammunitions that we were providing to the Ukraine side, that because Russia didn't retaliate before then, they never will. And I just don't think that that's a wise thing to do, because, and Putin is a man of his word. And there's certainly many things he said where he's absolutely been good on that. The attack into Ukraine in 2022 being chief among them. He had been saying for 15 years prior to it, he'd been giving all kinds of warnings about what they would do if it went too far. And I think that's an instructive point here, because he is also patient and he's not reckless. But it does seem that his patience has an end, and his whatever means he's calculated, that he understands that his actions have consequences and that there is a retaliation or response from the other side. And the question is always, if you take a certain action and a certain course of action, what is going to be the response to the other side? Because there's going to be. We don't seem to do that. We don't seem to take the actions of that we put in there and think about what's going to happen on the other side. We think blithely, he'll do nothing. He's just bluffing. He's lying. He's not going to do it because he knows that we'll do something bad. And as Richard Thole here says, yes, he would. Bobby Taylor, yes, absolutely. And Medvedev is it's an interesting thing. I'm glad you brought that up about Medvedev. Many in the West just dismiss him, even some of my colleagues, as a clown. And they say, we don't even pay attention to anything he says in here. I'm not sure that that's a wise thing to do. He's a lot more emotional than Putin is. Used a lot higher hyperbole, and has made a lot of threats and claims over the years of this war here. And a lot of them haven't come to pass because he's not the head of state. But I think that he does project and communicate what the head of state does think and what many people in Russia do think. And I know I see a lot of that echoed in some of the Russian media that comes out here. But the question is going to be, is that like, hey, this is your last chance. This is your last warning. Because if Putin does make good on some of these threats he's been making, there's going to be a response. I mean, there will be. I think it's fair to say that if Russia gives weapons, and I'm just doing this hypothetically, I don't have any insider knowledge here, but based on what Putin said, it's reasonable to suggest that, for example, he may give some to some of these anti-American groups in Syria, because we have bases in Syria and in Iraq. And there's plenty of Islamic groups that don't like the United States, and perhaps Russia finds some way to get strong weapons into them. They strike and hit some of these bases and kill American troops there. There is no American president that has ever existed that would be able to take something like that and do nothing. So the question would be then, what would the U.S. do in retaliation if Putin makes good on this? And he has to be ready to accept that response.
Okay, so narinig po natin yung first part ng video na yun. This guy who has this channel, I encourage you to follow him kasi marami siyang ini-interview ng mga military experts and political experts. Yung talagang eksperto, hindi yung parang dito mga nagpapanggap na eksperto na hindi naman. Pero ito yung mga to, they're real experts with real world experience, and those mostly former, like sa show niya sa YouTube, lumalabas si Scott Ritter, si dating nuclear weapons inspector ng UN, tapos si a lot of Colonel McGregor, yung mga matatalino talaga and policy making experts. And I encourage lahat ng nanonood na nakikinig sa atin ngayon, you take down or you pag pinanood nyo ulit dito sa page natin, ilista nyo yung YouTube address niya, hanapin nyo siya. Kasi yung YouTube may algorithm po yan. Pag yan ang pinapanood nyo, lalabas at lalabas yung mga video na katulad niyan. At magugulat po kayo yung mga totoong sinasabi nila nangyayari sa mundo. Including ang nangyayari dito sa Taiwan at yung China at dito sa Pilipinas. Magugulat po kayo yung katotohanan at yung pananaw ng mga eksperto at strategic and security experts dito sa Pilipinas na hindi bayad o hindi nasa ng propagandist na pinapalabas sa mga mainstream media na ini-interview nila, na kunwari expert. Okay? So, I encourage you to get involved in that. The second part of the interview is nandun po yung kaibigan niya nasa St. Petersburg. And I want you to hear this para makita ko ano yung nangyayari dun sa St. Petersburg sa Russia. This is in Western Russia. Okay? Sige, Ver, can you play part 2?
They should be asking these same questions. Larry, welcome to the show here. I'm grateful that you finally found a way to pop in.
We're sitting atop a hotel in downtown St. Petersburg. And it's this restaurant called Mansarda. I'll just give you a quick scan.
That's awesome. Hey, I wonder if you could just kind of tell everybody real quickly, what are you doing there in Russia, first of all? What's the event?
I was invited to attend the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. It has about 20,000 people in attendance from over 140 countries. I was asked to make a presentation on sort of the new world economic and political order that's unfolding before us. So I'm actually... the group I'm with the grandson of Nelson Mandela, and I'm also with one of the largest owners of a media company in China. It's quite a mixed group.
Wow, that's a pretty big group, and I think just the fact that that's happening with so many different countries, we could probably spend a whole show talking about the shifting economic order in the world, and kind of how some of our actions are, helping push that in the bad direction from our interest here. But listen, I want to talk about what's really hot right now, and that is some of these claims in the last 2 days, especially by Vladimir Putin about. As some of our viewers have been talking about here, that Putin seems to be fed up with what's been going on in the United States and what we've been doing. I want to kind of get a running start into this. I'm going to show you something that Putin said actually in February of this year to kind of show the progression of where his mind has been. Watch this one first.
They're talking about the possibility of sending NATO military contingents to Ukraine. But we remember the fate of those who once sent their contingents to our country. But now, the consequences for possible interventionists will be much more tragic. We also have weapons. They know about this. As I just said, we also have a weapon that can hit targets on their territory. And they should understand that what they're doing now, trying to scare the whole world, it does risk a conflict with nuclear weapons, which means the destruction of civilization.
Now, I don't know if Larry, were you able to hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So that's what he said back in February, and elsewhere in that same conversation, he ended it by saying, "Don't these people understand that? Don't they understand what they're playing with?" And it almost seems like that some in the West don't, or that they think that he'll never do that. But as we see in this one, first of all, let's hit the one from yesterday, I think on the 5th of June, to where he finally says, to quote one of our viewers here, that he was fed up with our BS, so to speak, is that he says, okay, you've been using your weapons to give to Ukraine to fire on my territory. Guess what? We can play that. Two can play that game. Here's what he said.
Мы думаем на тему о том, что если кто-то считает возможным поставлять такое оружие в зону боевых действий для нанесения ударов по нашей территории и создания проблем для нас, то почему у нас нет права поставлять наше оружие такого же класса в те регионы мира, где будут наноситься удары по чувствительным объектам тех стран, которые делают это в отношении России?
So let's take a look at that first, Larry. Before you came on, we showed President Biden earlier today in Normandy Beach saying, yeah, look, I didn't give him permission to shoot like into the Kremlin or into Moscow, just a little bit into Russian territory. It's no big deal. Is it a big deal?
Huge deal. And in fact, if you paid attention to not only what Putin said, but what Sergei Lavrov said 2 days ago, as well as the deputy foreign minister, Sergei Rybkov, spelled Ryabkov. I have met with Mr. Rybkov. He is a very sober, understated person. And when he said what he did the other day about Russia being fed up, these boys ain't playing. They're not talking like Washington, D.C. politicians saying one thing meaning another. They mean exactly what they're saying. So here's what I think we're going to see. I think the Russians will now start supplying the groups linked to the anti-ISIS groups that are operating in Syria and Iraq. They will supply them with weapons that can hit U.S. military bases. They will supply the Houthis with weapons that can hit U.S. ships. They're not playing. They say, you're going to launch those into our country? Fine, you're going to pay a price. And they're going to do it.
That's a pretty bold statement there, and a pretty sobering possibility, because I mean you see when any American troops have been killed in the Middle East and these bases that we should have gotten rid of long ago, I'll just throw that in there. But now then they become a point of vulnerability, which I've been preaching about since 2019, and now then it's at a higher level. If that happened, here's the question I got for you. Looking at, from the U.S. side here, we always respond if any of our troops are killed here. What would we do in response to American troops getting killed because something was provided by the Russians?
A lot we could do, at least to Russia, without risking destroying ourselves. We could try to we could try to go after these groups that are launching the missiles. But I mean, let's be candid. Operation Prosperity Guardian's been underway now for going on 7 months. We haven't been able to stop the Houthis. I mean, for God's sake, people, if you can't stop the Houthis, you think you're going to stop Iran, or you're going to stop Russia or China? I mean, we need to wake up and look in the mirror, because this has now got to the point of our country has become the ultimate narcissist. The essence of a narcissist is someone who believes they're more better than they really are, that they're much more talented than they really are. And also, think about this in the context. We've had Donald Trump promise that he's going to use U.S. military forces going cross-border into Mexico after the drug cartels. And I can understand why, because the drug cartels are killing over 100,000 Americans a year. That's like, that's twice as many as we lost in Vietnam over 15 years, and that's just 1 year. Well, what happens is then if Russia started supplying the Mexican drug cartels with missiles to hit inside the United States? We would take that as an act of war. Well, by God, that's exactly what we're doing to Russia in Ukraine, because Russia had as much reason to go across border into Ukraine to stop the killing of Russians as Donald Trump is talking about going into Mexico to go after cartels. But see, that's our problem. We can sure dish it out, but by God, we can't take it.
So what's going to happen, Larry, if let's just use that example there. Let's say that one of these anti-American violent groups in Syria gets these weapons, makes good, kills American troops. And let's say then that Biden then says, okay, to complete that game, we're going to take out Russian assets in Syria because there's plenty of them there. What happens then?
The Russians will retaliate, and the United States will be at war with Russia, and we're not ready to go to war with Russia. Like I said, we can't even stop the Houthis. So on what planet do these people live that, we allow the Houthis to continue to attack ships in the Red Sea? We can't stop that, but by God, we're going to shut down the Russians. The Russians have the most combat-tested military in the world. There is no other military that is combat-tested and ready as they are on all fronts. Infantry, air power, and when you put those two combined, the United States we've been fighting the third-rate team. We've been fighting the guys that don't have fixed-wing aircraft. They don't have close air support with a rotary wing aircraft. They don't have artillery that can fire 30, 40 miles at us. They don't, on and on and on. We've been used to fighting guys in sandals with AK-47s and some mortars. And we call that combat. We have no idea what combat is. And what Putin and the rest, when the foreign ministry is talking this way, it'd be one thing if it was the Ministry of Defense. But when the foreign ministry is talking that way, it's time for American politicians to wake up and recognize we've been poking the bear is awake, and you do not want to mess with a hungry bear.
Now, why do you distinguish between the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? For the American audience who may not understand any distinction, why is that noteworthy?
Because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs they're about diplomacy. They're about talking. They're about trying to calm things down. They're not out poking people in the chest and saying, hey, calling them other names and questioning, their parental heritage. These are people that are skilled diplomats. They're about making friends, not about creating enemies. And the fact that they've gotten to the point that they don't feel like they can have any conversations anymore with anyone in Washington is alarming. And I've heard that directly from one of the senior foreign ministry types. They go, who do we talk to? We're ready to talk. Who do we talk to? Nobody's answering the phone at the Biden White House. He's too busy trying to figure out what flavor ice cream he wants before he goes to bed.
Yeah. So we actually had Doug McGregor on yesterday talking about some of the similar things that our forces are trained in counterinsurgency warfare. And I mean, most of their entire careers of the people who are in right now. And so we just have no idea what coming under that kind of firepower. I've seen like the toss flamethrower systems have just had devastating consequences. The glide bombs, all those things on the front line. And I'm talking about somebody who fought in an armored warfare early on. And even I only had a fraction, just a small taste of what the incoming fire that we would face if we go in today. So I totally agree about this, about how difficult that process would be. But let's look at the next level. So you just painted a pretty good picture to why on the tactical, on the battlefield level, we would not be in a good place if we get into a fight with Russia. But unfortunately, this could all too easily escalate. And today, Vladimir Putin, after yesterday talking about the tactical situation, now he escalated it up to the strategic when he said this.
Американцы — единственная страна, Соединенные Штаты, которая использовала ядерное оружие во Второй мировой войне. Хиросима, Нагасаки — 20 килотонн. Наше тактическое ядерное оружие — 70-75 килотонн. Это такое ядерное тактическое оружие. Давайте не доводить не только до использования, а даже до угрозы использования. На Западе считают, что Россия никогда этого не использует. У нас же есть ядерная доктрина. Посмотрите, что написано. Если чьи-то действия будут угрожать нашему суверенитету и территориальной целостности, мы считаем для себя возможным использовать все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Нельзя относиться к этому легко, поверхностно. Нужно относиться профессионально.
Now that kind of ekes back to what you were saying a second ago about professionally, like on their diplomatic side here. But this to me is very alarming. And the reason why I showed that one from February to now, because he talked about in February that if this goes nuclear, you're talking about potentially the end of civilization, because once one of those thresholds is crossed and then you have the tit for tat, no one knows where it's going to stop. But now then you see here on June the 6th, he's talking a lot more directly about this is our doctrine, this is our capability, we're willing to use it. So the question I have to you is, how serious is he? How close is he? And is there any difference between now and February?
Big difference between then. He's, to use the Missouri farmer expression, he's dead ass serious. He's not playing. This is not a bluff. He is saying exactly what he means. Look, for example, if we deploy F-16s into Ukraine, the F-16 is capable of carrying a nuclear weapon. That's what they're configured for. How does Russia know that F-16 sitting on the tarmac is not loaded up with a nuclear weapon in light of what the United States has been saying? They have to assume, just like we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis, if they're putting missiles in Cuba that can reach the continental United States, we don't have the luxury of assuming, oh, they're just conventional warheads, so they're not going to do a lot of damage. Your doctrine dictates that you assume that they're carrying nuclear weapons, and you got to stop them. And that's exactly how the Russians are doing it. On top of that, we have already deployed systems in Poland and in Romania that are capable of firing nuclear weapons. So far to this point, the Russians have not made that a red line, but they're now making that a red line. And the U.S. politicians better wake up and pay attention, or else we're going to be in big trouble. And this literally could lead to the destruction of U.S. military bases in the United States with nuclear weapons.
What do you think, as best you can? You know, I'm sure no one's giving you any inside information here, but based on your analysis and your knowledge, what would trigger Putin actually using a tactical nuclear weapon? He mentioned in there about his territorial sovereignty. You mentioned about the possibility of just seeing a nuclear capable aircraft in the sky. What would actually trigger him to use it, do you think?
I think if we used a Taurus missile, a German Taurus missile, or an ATACMS that hit one of the strategic radars that Russia has deployed, that would probably elicit a Soviet response with a tactical move. If it's drones, they're irritated by it, and but they're going to step it up conventionally. You know, they view nuclear as a last resort. But the thing the United States needs to understand is Russia has at least prepared. Now, when I say they prepared, they don't go into it with the illusion that, oh yeah, we can win this without losses. They recognize there would be terrific losses. But this is a country that lost 27 million people during World War II and survived. The United States lost a grand total of 430,000 to 470. We still don't have good numbers. That's total in Pacific and European theaters. To put it in sort of numbers people can understand, 16 out of every 100 Russians died during World War II. In the United States, only 20% of one person died out of 100. So the Russians understand the risk that comes with that loss. That's one of the things Americans don't. We've been playing war for the last 60 years. Yeah, we lost 58,000 in Vietnam. And if it was one of your family members, that's a loss that you can't put a price on. But for the rest of Americans, it's no big deal. Nobody was deprived of being able to fill their car up with gas or go to a movie or go out to eat, or they'd have to make any sacrifice. Those sacrifices are paid by these other people. And so when we live in that kind of fantasy world where we've been able to launch wars in Iraq and in Syria and in Afghanistan, and we pay really no price at all, it's easy to go to war and to make these kinds of threats without understanding the consequences.
Larry,
And
I wonder
Russia-
if you can kind of explain what the Russian doctrine of escalate to de-escalate means in general terms and how that might look like if it is, because obviously Russia, if they use nuclear weapons, it's not going to be because they want to get into a nuclear exchange. They want to prevent that. What would that look like in reality?
They'll take out strategic targets that the United States could potentially hit back with. And at the same time, they'd be prepared with their defense systems that are quite capable of shooting down intercontinental ballistic missiles. Not 100%, but what they're going to demonstrate, they will basically castrate the United States. We will be unable to respond, and that is where the United States has never been in that position in our history. But we will be confronted with that if this escalation continues, and it's senseless. There's no need for it, but we continue to portray Russia as some totalitarian dictatorship that is intent on conquering the world. That's just a lie. It's nonsense. All Americans need to do is come visit. You'd be surprised at the number of Americans I've run into that have moved from the United States to Russia. And why? Because they're finding more freedom here, believe it or not. That's what they're telling me.
Now, I wonder if you can, because we're running a little bit low on time here. I wonder if you can tell me what is the mood there among the Russians? Because if you're talking about nuclear weapons, or talking about using tactical weapons, elsewhere in the world and kind of a tit for tat, that's probably one thing. But even the talk of possibility of using nuclear weapons, everybody understands one could come back. How do the people there view the threat here, and do they worry about what Putin's saying?
They don't I have not heard anybody say, "Oh boy, Putin's lost." No, they're just the opposite. They see Putin having been very, very patient. So far, the war really hasn't touched the Russians. I've been in Moscow and St. Petersburg in the last 6 months, and there's not a lot of talk about the war. You don't see a lot of signs up. I've seen a couple of signs offering people a contract to come, go to work with the Russian military. But they're largely untouched by the war right now. But there is growing concern that if the West keeps escalating this, they feel obligated. What has happened is it's rallied the population around Putin in a way. He's got more support now than he did 2 years ago.
Okay, so that's what you hear, no? Medyo hindi na, nakakatakot and also nakaka-enlighten po ang sinasabi nila. Now, these guys are not ordinary people. Yung mga nagre-report po dyan, and even the show host has a distinguished career in the military, and nakakita na yan ng gera. And they're very strategic. And these are the guys that are saying, ang sabi po ng ng reporter ni Larry Johnson. Sabi niya, nandito ako sa Russia and seryosong-seryoso. I've never seen them as serious as they are now because nakikita nila ang delikado talaga yung situation ngayon. At nakikita nila yung US daw parang walang namamahalang matino ngayon. In so many words, they don't believe in the leadership. Kala nila na ma-manage nila. Si Putin, sabi niya to dati na parang kaya niyang i-manage. Pero ngayon po, dahil palapit na, delikado po. At sinasabi dun sa kanina, wala kasing English voiceover, no? Si Putin nagsasalita. Sabi niya, pinapakita niya yung nagsasalita sa harap ng mga cabinet members niya. At sabi niya, in this history, hindi ko alam bakit gumagalaw ng ganyan ng Amerika. Di ba nila alam na meron tayong nuclear doctrine na pwede natin gamitin. At gagamitin natin kung nasa-threaten na yung existence ng buong Russian nation. Make no mistake, Putin looks at it as yung buong nation and history ng Russia ang under threat ngayon ng US. So they are trying to be patient, they are trying to resolve it diplomatically, pero sabi nga ng isa is delikado na tayo. Seryoso na to. At sinasabi nila walang may gusto ng gera, ayaw ng Putin ng gera. What he did in Ukraine, he had to do kasi ginegera na sila since 2014. Yan ang hindi sinasabi sa mga taong bayan. At pinapalabas nila demonyo si Putin, demonyo si Xi Jinping. At kailangan na. Yan po, yung propaganda na po yan na dinidemonize o pinapalabas na masamang tao si Putin tsaka si Xi Jinping.
Yes.
Yan po ang ginamit ng Germany against the Jews before World War II. Okay? Na propaganda ang ginagamit. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing Franco did. Generalissimo Franco in Spain. It's the same thing that Mussolini did in Italy. They demonize their enemies. Then yung mga tao kasi hindi nag-iisip or they're not informed, nadadala. Sumasama. Pagkatapos noon, gera. Mag-isip-isip po tayo, yan din ang ginagawa. Gamit ang mainstream media dito sa atin. Kat, may isa pa akong video sana pero medyo
Pero mukhang maganda yung panghuling video mo Ito
Sige,
it's just a 7 minutes.
7 minutes na lang yan. Kaya, sige.
Oo,
Where
kaya
can
pa
you
naman.
play this? This is an interview with a Russian military,
Yes.
former military naman.
Yes.
So maganda rin to. Sige.
If you remember, Putin once was talking about nuclear bombs. He said that we are not going to be the first who's launching nuclear bomb, but we're not going to be the second. This is a pretty clear message for the West, in my opinion. And Andre, the problem is here that before this conflict in Ukraine started, they were talking the same way, really the same way, that the way that Putin is afraid of going into Ukraine because Ukraine will crush Russia. You remember the rhetoric in those days. They really thought that Ukraine can do huge damage to Russia.
Well, as I already stated, the intelligence they receive on Russia is provided by imbeciles, essentially, and dissidents. Look at Washington, D.C. And you know what, you throw the stone, you'll hit some fanatic Russophobe like Julia Ioffe or Rebecca Koffler or Max Boot, those people who pretend that they are serious intelligence professionals. They are nobodies. They have no background. They don't understand what real economy is. They don't understand Russian history. They are here in the United States to spite Russia. Okay, and so they live there with fantasy, and they obviously very little positive has to be stated on number of the immigrants who contributed to this sheer idiocy which United States had about Russia. And this didn't start yesterday. It all started during World War II. And I example today, well, people don't forget, they forgot. The United States is completely oblivious, population mostly, about the fact that actually tomorrow will be celebration of the D-Day. What many people do not understand, D-Day wouldn't have happened if not the consultations of allies with Red Army, with Stalin in 1943, which was the final decision was made during Tehran conference in November 43. And that Russians, said, yes, we're gonna attack, once you begin to the landing, we're gonna attack, thus drawing, German forces away from the Western Front, theater of operations. And that's what Russians did. They launched on 22nd of June, Operation Bagration, which completely demolished everything. I mean, Army Group Center, 500,000 of Germans through the German Wehrmacht basically written off, and enormous amount of the equipment. It was larger in sense than Stalingrad, So, and it was largest offensive operation in the history. And already then they started making doubts, doubting that what Russians were saying. So that is why in July, Stalin ordered parades of the captured Germans. There were 57,000 of them marched in Moscow for public to see. Then there were about other 50,000 marched in Minsk and Kiev. So, and that was to demonstrate not to Soviet population, which of course was privy to this, and it all made their, documentary reels. It was to demonstrate to Western allies that, guys, you better face the reality of the scale and scope of the operations on the Eastern Front before you begin to doubt. Well, guess what? Since 1940s, they are rewriting the history of the World War II. So there you go. What are you going to learn when your whole history is confabulated or written by the Wehrmacht and SS generals, which United States imported in, industrial quantities, and they just, trained them, so to speak. Ask Douglas MacGregor if he will ever agree to talk about it. He was influenced by Germans and Wehrmacht and Bundeswehr. And he bought, and he swallowed hook, line, and sinker all those fairy tales and mythology which they were, providing for the United States. In United States field manuals, its strategic concepts, offensive concepts, have been shaped by Wehrmacht generals. And that's what it is. So guess what? You're probably not going to learn much from the guys who lost the war catastrophically. And Red Army ended up in Berlin. Yet here we are. They learned from wrong people, let me tell
you. We've learned that Biden is officially allowing Ukrainians to use the weapons of NATO and United States and attack Russia directly inside Russia. And there is an article in CNN that it says the military analysts in CNN, they're talking about these type of actions. There would be no outcome if they do this. Why? Even the analysts in CNN, they're believing that there is no outcome for these type of actions. But when it comes to the Biden administration and this decision, in your opinion, why they're seeking by officially announcing that they're allowing Ukrainians to attack Russia inside Russia, if there would be no outcome, no game changer in this type of behavior?
PR, they need to panic and desperation. They're recycling same old again. You remember, it's just Russians have been catching the Storm Shadow and Scalps and attackams over Russian cities since October 2023, non-stop. I mean, every day there's some shooting down HIMARS, they're shooting down attackams, they're shooting down Scalps and all that. So what's the news? The news are United States elite, being absolutely useless, having no useful skills in life, be that fighting the war or run the serious economic programs and things of this nature. The only thing they can do is PR. That's the only way it is, because the whole thing is tied to actually donor class and their necessity to be reelected. So, considering the fact that today there are another 1,700 of Ukrainians are killed and wounded, by Russians. So what's left? And they understand that NATO is defeated. Because if they want to try the war, sure, let them try it. You see what's going to happen. They have only PR. They need to recycle those statements. Those how to put it politely, grandiose statement. We allowed. Okay, yeah, sure, it's been happening now for 8 months. So yeah, what's the news? And the news are strictly for domestic consumption. Period. So, and Russians are already openly today again. One of their deputy foreign ministers came out again and said, "What's the news? They've been doing this like forever, So, and it's like, to keep people of the United States in in a proper shape, to have them excited and go vote for Biden and Democratic Party on, and that's pretty much it. There's nothing more to it.
Okay, so that's an excerpt, no? Pero pwede niyong kunin o panoorin yung buong video niyan online, di ba? May mga detalye naman si Ver. Ver can post it on our Facebook sa Messenger or the comment section kung ano yung mga links sa videos sa mga to. So you pwedeng panoorin as a whole. So these are the ang hindi nakalagay sa video is they were both shaking their heads na parang hindi nila maintindihan kung ano talagang intensyon ng US. Bakit sila pumipilit at delikado ang mangyayari. Kasi hindi naman pwedeng manahimik lang yung Russia. So we are in, again, I wanted to emphasize nga, tama nga yung topic natin, we are in a very, very dangerous situation. Pinoprovoke ng US, seems to be the US government is provoking and pushing through their proxies using NATO, Zelensky, and other countries.
Yes.
To push Russia into a potential conflict. And that will involve China and other nations. And parang gusto nila magkagera. At hindi maintindihan ng mga eksperto at nag-warning na sila. The last time we were in this very dangerous position was in 1962. Yung tinatawag na Cuban Missile Crisis na maalala. Because this is World War III. This is nuclear war po. At hindi na yung tinatawag nilang conventional warfare, yung mga sinasabi nilang mga plano, hindi na po. Kasi pag nag-isang nuclear missile po at ay ang pinalipad, bilyones ang mamamatay po. Yun lang po yung namin. At dito tayo sa KDP, responsibilidad po namin ibigay sa mga kababayan natin yung katotohanan. Kaya every Sunday, if we can, we will continue to post things on our Facebook and our websites and all. And plus, every Sunday, if you join us, you will get this type of discourse or discussion na walang makikita dyan sa mga mainstream media kasi hindi nila pinapag-usapan ang dapat pag-usapan. Ayun lang, Kat.
Well, obviously, Itos, no, kanina talagang desperate move na eh. Desperado na talaga ang US, lalo na tong grupo ni Biden, no. At talagang ginagamit niya ang Ukraine pang-atake sa Russia, no. And ang gusto ko lang ipasok dito, Itos, is yung magandang balita na nangyari dun sa St. Petersburg, 'di ba? And dun sa tatlong lugar kung saan may mga developments na mga magaganda katulad ng Africa na nagkaroon ng paglagda ng West African Nation of Guinea na MOA kasama ang nuclear power company ng Russia na Rosatom. So, yun, maglalagay sila ng floating nuclear power plant sa mga areas doon. At sa Asia naman, noong June 6 nga, nagkaroon ng agreement para sa China, Kiristan at ang hirap nito isang railway na lang na magbibigay ng interconnectivity hindi lang para sa China at sa Central Asia kundi Central Asia sa Timog Kanlurang Asia, Africa at Europa. And kita mo yung mga development na to, no? Sana ito yung talagang makita ng mga leaders ng maraming mga bansa, no? But anyway, it's time to read the text messages ito sent by our listeners. Their opinion does not necessarily reflect our own, but we reserve the right to read them to the public in the interest of freedom of speech. It's already 8:44 na po ng gabi, Philippine Standard Time. At kayo po ay nakikinig pa rin dito sa impilan ng RMN DZXL 558 kHz AM band at sabayan niyo po kaming napapanood sa pamamagitan po ng social media accounts ng Katipunan Channel. Okay, meron tayong first text mula kay George Balisan. Pogo gambling simula na ng World War III. Okay, mula kay Dorce Dalasan. That's true. I'm here in Europe. I always watch retired General MacGregor, Scott Ritter at marami pang iba. Hinahabol nila ang kanilang young Ukraine para maging sundalo. Kaso ang NATO, desperate. At mula naman, naka-check-in naman sa atin si Hannah May Gam. Good evening po, watching from Leyte. Always pray. At sabi ni Dennis Estebal, gamit na gamit ng US ang mainstream media natin. Sabi ni Joe Bederio, magandang gabi po Ma'am Cathy, Sir Itos, mabuhay po, watching from Jeddah. Thank you po Mang Joe. At sabi pa rin ni Dalasan, watch also Geopolitics by Ben Norton, one also of the best researchers. At sabi naman ni Lapi ang Malaya, good PM, lagi ko pinapanood ang military summary update ng war sa Ukraine kung ilang area na nakukuha ng Russia, especially today sa Kharkiv region. At sabi naman ni Juliet Tafe Estacio, thanks for the information. I watch Scott Ritter at General MacGregor. Continue updating us on the subject. Sabi naman ni Boyet Periabras, good evening mga katipon. Nagbalik muli tayo sa kadiliman ng martial law. Nasaksihan ko nung panunupil ng ama at ngayon ang anak naman. Mas masahol pa, dictatorship rules like father, like son. From Subic, watching you, Miss Cathy. Thank you po, kasama po natin si Itos. At mula pa rin kay Noraline May, Almighty God Allah, protect our country and bless the universe. Amen. At sabi ni Ricardo Hurillo, hashtag Free Palestine. At sabi ni Dorce, always follow Harry Schlanger and Madam Helga LaRouche. Mula naman kay Virgilio Villanueva, good day Sir Itos and Ma'am Cathy. Naka-check-in si Fernando Rosales sa atin. At sabi ni Joet Garcia, Ukrainian must choose peace now. Trump must win this year. BBM must resign ASAP. Install VP Sara, no to war. Peace and economic stability for humanity. Sabi naman ni Gregorio Tigon, hashtag no to war. At mula naman kay Ferdinand Bedua, Judge Napolitano, Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas MacGregor, Larry Johnson, Ray McGovern, Danny Haipung. Yan. Parang bitin yung ano kanya. Anyway, mula naman kay Lynn Motas Sarco, watching from Bacolod City. Thank you po, Ma'am Lynn. At sabi ni Fernando, NATO's existence is to suppress the rise of Russia Cold War. Communism and democracy were made by British Empire to be subjected to fascism and Nazism. Ano po ba ang nuclear protocol na yan? Pag may nuclear war, every nation may designated na nuclear warhead na ta-target. That is why they say it's the end of humanity. Warsaw Pact was hijacked by the British Empire. Okay. Mula naman kay Joet Garcia, Ukraine is being used as a litmus test. At sabi naman ni Glenn Buwan, Russian flotilla of Navy ships including nuclear subs are bound for Cuba. What then? At sabi naman ni Dennis Estabal, parang kayo lang ang nakakaintindi ng danger ng nuclear war at nuclear fallout. Yung mga mainstream media at gobyerno natin nagpo-provoke pa na magkagera versus China. Okay, yan po ang ilan sa mga texters and comments natin mula sa ating mga social media accounts. Maraming salamat po sa lahat po ng mga nagko-comment po sa atin, and please continue sharing, liking, and of course spread the news at yung totoo pong mga balita at paano po natin dapat tignan ang iba't ibang nangyayari sa mundo. Okay, Itos, para sa parting message natin, it's already 8:49 na po ng gabi.
Alright, thank you Cathy. Thank you sa mga commenters and patuloy lang po tayo na sumabaybay, tama ba 'yon?
Yes.
On the developments, no? Kasi wala po tayong makukuha dito sa mainstream. Sinasabi ko na sa iyo, lahat ng channel dito na broadcast at yung radio and yung newspaper po. Wala pa kayong makukuhang any significant development. Marami dyan propaganda po na sinasabi sa kanila, ito lang ilalabas nyo. Okay? Local and international. So, but because you have YouTube, you have Rumble, you have Twitter, yung na nakabanggit na mga pangalan, tama po yun. Sinusundan ko rin yung mga yon. Douglas McGregor and all of those guys. Matatalino po yung mga yon. Tapos very, very credentialed. Yan ang mga eksperto. Yan ang totoong eksperto na dapat ikonsulta. Okay? So, they are also very sane. Ibig sabihin, hindi sila tanga na gusto magkagera. Okay? Kung alam nyo lang yung mga interviews dyan, honestly, pinagtatawanan na nangyayari sa, hindi naman pinagtatawanan, pero parang nag-ano sila na natatawa sa mga issue ng ginagawa natin against China. Alam po nila ang China. Alam po nila yung capabilities ng war ng China. At parang naguguluhan sila sa Pilipino at yung liderato natin na ginagawang malaki yung maliit na bagay at tila parang sumusunod. Alam nila po, yung mga ekspertong yan, na sumusunod tayo sa gusto ng administrasyong Biden at yung mga nagko-control sa kanya. Yun ang komento nila. At hindi sila natatakot sa China kasi alam nila yung China ayaw maggera. Same thing sa Russia po. Pero pinopoke natin, sinasabi lang poke the bear, the Russian bear. Nagagalit na eh. Isa pang narinig niyo po yung sinabi ni Biden sa interview. Una-una, mukha na siyang matanda na at medyo ulyanin na. Tapos siya yung mag-i-in charge ng nuclear protocol ng US. Di ba delikado yun? Di ba? Sabi niya kanina, yung sinabi ko naman, hindi naman sa loob ng Russia, hindi naman yung capital city, diyan lang sa mga probinsya ng Russia pwede natin tirahin. Imagine, sinabi ng US President yon. Para mo sinabing, sige, hindi naman Manila o Cebu titirahin namin. Yung lang, yung mga Palawan or mga General Santos. Ganun ang lumalabas noon. Imagine, galing sa bibig ng isang nuclear power ng US. Ganun ka parang wala ng pag-iisip tong ginagawa nila. So we need to keep abreast of the situation, the real issues. We need to prepare. We need to tell our leaders, hopefully if some of them are watching this, we need to prepare. There is a real danger of World War III. we need to prepare. We need to save as much. Prepare for that situation where nagka-blockade, walang pagkain na papasok sa Pilipinas. Anong gagawin? Anong programa nyo?
Yes.
Paano kung walang angkat ng oil? Kasi hindi na pwedeng gumalaw. Kasi may gera na sa buong mundo. Paano yung pagkain natin? Yung ini-import natin, number 1 importer ng bigas tayo. Anong programa nyo? Hindi naman bukas magkakabigas eh. Magkakakanin ng tao, may mamamatay ng tao. Paano yung mga gamot? Di ba ho? So, again, kung ako yung leader, ako yung in control, o ako yung leader ng isang bansa. So bansa natin, i-invoke ko na yung Article 12 because we need to take control of our basic utilities which affect all prices of all commodities in order to save as much Filipino lives in the coming period. Because the way it's looking, it does not look good for any country, and we have to prepare. Yun lang po. Thank you for joining us tonight. Hope you have a good evening. Keep educating yourselves po, and keep watching these other media, yung sa YouTube, yung ibang mga channels. Mas marami kayong matututunan kaysa kung manood lang kayo ng regular news natin at lahat. Thank you po.
Thank you, Itos. At lagi po nating sinasabi dito sa ating palatuntunan, maging mapagmatsyag, suriin at alamin ang katotohanan. Maging bukas ang tenga at kaisipan, matutong magsaliksik at balikan ang kasaysayan dahil nagbibigay ito ng aral sa ating lahat upang mailantad kung sino ang tunay na sinungaling na sumisira ng ating bansa. Huwag matakot manindigan sa tama. Ilabas ang katotohanan dahil sa dulo, tayo ang lilikha ng isang makatarungan, mapayapa at maunlad na kinabukasan para sa ating bansa. Gisingin natin ang ating mga pinuno sa publiko at pribadong sektor na ang pangangalaga sa buhay ng tao, pagtataguyod ng pangkalatang kapakanan at kabutihang panlahat ay dapat na kanilang pangunahing interes at pananagutan. Sa ngalan po ng katipon ng palatuntunang ito, ang pamunuan po ng Radio Mindanao Network at Katipunan Channel, lalo na po sa ating mga magagaling na transmitter engineer at technicians, mga broadcast technician natin sa loob ng himpilan ng DZXL at dito sa Katipunan Channel, kay Engineer Domedador Abogado, Valentin Villasica, kay Resurrection Ray Albesa, kay Erwin Makatangay, Cecilio Valencio, Alex Abelon Sr., kay Chris Narvaez, kay Daniel Fagonilo, at kay Richard Ramirez, of course, kay Ver Archivido. Kami po ay pansamantalang nagpapaalam at nagpapasalamat na sinamahan ninyo kami, ang Hora de Peligro ng ating bayan at ng buong mundo. Hanggang sa linggo po muli mga katipon, alas 7 hanggang alas 9 ng gabi. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.
Inyong napakinggan si Itos Valdes kasama si Cathy Cruz at iba pang katipon na nakilahok sa talakayan.
Ating Katipunan!
Samahang muli si Itos Valdes sa susunod na linggo alas 7 hanggang alas 9 ng gabi sa himpilan ng RMN DZXL 558 kHz AM band at social media accounts ng Partido KDP.